The love of God is displayed in many ways, but the greatest benefit we have to God's love is His mercy. If it were not for God's mercy, we would never have had the opportunity to receive His grace for our salvation. The most godly thing that you can do is be merciful. Let's take a look at what that means. So let's talk about the merciful. First of all, we'll take a look and see that God says in Matthew 5:7, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." First, we'll examine the inward attribute, then we'll take a look at the outward behavior of it, and then we'll take a look at the actual blessing of this, which means to be free. Okay. So it's one of those characteristics of God that has like an infinite number of different facets and things to it. I had it shown as a diamond that is reflecting by the sun, where you have the facets of it that are all over the place. So it talks about His abundant mercies in Scripture, and talks about His many mercies, and so it's used oftentimes in plural. So what I want to do is take and explain how God describes Himself here. This is how God described Himself to Moses on Mount Sinai. He says, "The Lord descended in a cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord, and the Lord passed before him and proclaimed." Now this is God proclaiming Himself. The Lord, is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Exodus 34, 5-7. So there are some characteristics He describes here, and the first one is merciful. He starts out with merciful, and then when He says merciful, then He says, let me tell you what mercy is. And He starts out there. He says it's gracious, it's patient, it's loving, it's faithful, and it's forgiving. That was what mercy is, and He starts right out showing that when He starts speaking right off the bat. This isn't a totally exhaustive list of merciful, but this is the list God gives Moses of that He is merciful. What does that mean? This is what this means. And so Psalm chapter 51, verse 1 describes this immeasurable breadth of mercy. He says, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the multitude of your tender mercies, blot out my transgressions." So the Scripture defines God's capacity to show mercy not according to our righteousness or according to our worthiness, but according to His boundless resources and His unlimited multitude of mercies. So it's important to understand we are given mercy not based upon whether we deserve it or not. It's based upon God's ability to provide all that we can ever need, which is never exhausted. So inside the temple in Jerusalem is a special place called the Holy of Holies. It is where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. The Ark is a wooden chest. It's about 2 foot by 3 feet. It's not really huge. God inspired the sculptures and the artists and the woodworkers and all the people that worked on this to make it perfect. They didn't come up with this naturally on their own. He did that for all the different things that were going on in the tabernacle at the time. The entire thing was overlaid with gold, and the lid of the ark was called the mercy seat. And once every year, the blood sacrifice of the atonement was sprinkled over that mercy seat. The high priest wouldn't dare go into the Holy of Holies without having the blood of a spotless lamb to sprinkle on that mercy seat. The blood was then sprinkled on the seat, and the Shekinah glory of God was His presence. It was His illustration or His demonstration of His presence being there. Now within this Ark of the Covenant, among a couple other things, was also the law. The law was the original tablets that the Ten Commandments were put on. And so the law was God's perfect standard of mankind in order to come into God's presence. And of course we know that unless you meet that perfect standard, you can't stand in God's presence, and nobody can meet that perfect standard. What he's saying here is that the only way to come into the presence of God is through the blood of the spotless Lamb. That is the only way any human being can come there, because they can't meet His perfect standard. And so we know that these sacrifices were only symbols. They were symbolic of the final spotless Lamb who would shed his blood for us, that we might be able to attain the mercy of God and come into God's presence. And that Lamb, of course, John 1:29, is Jesus Christ. He is the one who we must pass through. So this is why God says when he describes himself to Moses, he lists merciful or mercy as the very first attribute or character. Because without God's mercy, there is no possible way for any human being to come into the presence of God. And that's what he is trying to say, and that's what he is showing when he gives his description of himself to Moses. So let's see what this really looks like, what it means. When you look at the idea of the facets of God, they're all actionable verbs. Remember, that means that you do something. They aren't passive where you just watch something. They're actionable. It's where you take the initiative. It isn't that you wait for someone else to take the initiative. So if you're going to be merciful, you have to take the initiative to be merciful. You can't wait for somebody else to meet your criteria. So it means to initiate showing merciful behavior to others before they meet your conditions to deserve it. So these 5 facets, we're going to take a quick look at those, and we'll understand a little bit more about what this merciful means. So first of all, it means to be gracious. To be gracious means to be kind and useful in serving to others. It's actively showing goodwill, doing good to others, showing favor to someone, showing welfare to somebody else, helping others, and doing it without any expectation of thanks or recognition in return. So in John 1, verse 16 says this. He says, "For from his fullness we all have received grace upon grace." And so when we think about the idea of graciousness, of what gracious is, it means like the wave of an ocean is what it's referring to, that keeps coming to shore one upon another and one upon another without diminishing the ocean at all. That's what God's grace is. It keeps coming to us over and over again. And that's the kind of grace we have. So when we then look at the next characteristic, which is patient. Just as kindness will give anything to others, so patience will endure or take anything from others. So patience has the ability or capacity to be wronged and not retaliate. It means to be long-suffering, never take revenge for being hurt or insulted. It has the ability to be inconvenienced without or being taken advantage of without getting angry about it or upset about it over and over again by the same person. Remember 70 times 7? And to endure difficult circumstances and persevere for God's glory, no matter what your situation. It comes from the Greek word which means to remain under. That's what the idea of patient means. It means to bear under. It means like to bear under the weight of something. It's sort of like bearing under the weight of the cross that you take up for Christ and not tossing it aside when things get rough. Okay? You're patient. You're going to carry that you're going to bear that cross. You're going to carry that weight no matter what your situation. And when people start to ridicule you for it, or the road gets a little rocky, you don't toss it to the side and say, I'm done with this. Okay? That's what patience is. It holds on. In essence, it's Matthew 16:24, where it says, if anybody will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Don't toss it aside. There's no, and if it gets rough, throw it off. So loving, what does that mean? It comes from a compound word which means loving kindness. So it's a combination of loving kindness. So when you see loving kindness, you see the essence of mercy. Okay? And so love is the cause, and kindness is the effect. Love is the motivation, and kindness is the action. And John 3:16 is our best example. God so loved that he gave, right? So you have a cause and effect here. Love without kindness is empty and worthless, just like faith without works is the same. James chapter 2, verses 14 to 18. So this kind of love is shown to us in 1 John chapter 3, 16 to 18. He says, "By this we know that he laid down his life for us, and that we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone in this world," he's saying now, if anyone in this world has goods or has things that a brother needs, and yet doesn't give it to them, closes his heart to them, and sees his brother like that and doesn't do anything about it, how is God's love abiding in that person? That just doesn't work. He says, "Little children, let us not love just in word or talk, but in deed and in truth." So merciful, or being merciful, has a generosity aspect to it. Showing kindness is more than just being good. It means doing more than is necessary to help others. Not just meeting it, but doing more. Walk the extra mile. Think about all the things Jesus taught. It's always doing more, is what he's talking about. So when we allow the love of God to flow through you to others, that generosity becomes limitless, because your love will stop at some point. God's love never stops. And so that generosity keeps moving. So being generous means that you're going to invest your life in others. It's an investment. Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Exactly. What he's saying is that what you invest in, you love. If you invest your life in the good of others, you're going to love others. If you invest your life in the good of your enemies, you're going to love your enemies. So it's a generous thing for you to do this, because it's not something that is normal. It's above and beyond the normal. Also, loving takes grace to a whole new level. Grace is good. Loving takes it to a completely different level. While being gracious includes doing good things for other people, loving takes it to the next level, means sacrificing yourself for the good of others. Not just doing good, not just giving them from you, giving them of you. It's a big difference. While being patient includes bearing the weight of the cross, loving means paying the price for the cross. Big difference between those two. Loving is a deep, caring interest in someone, even to your own hurt. And it's a high-risk nature, because you're probably going to get hurt because of showing that compassion. So then let's take a look at the next one, which is to be faithful. That's the other aspect of mercy. There's a difference between being full of faith and being faithful. Okay? Our English language is a little bit goofy like that. To be full of faith means to have faith. To be faithful means to live the faith. The difference is between professing yourself to be trustworthy and actually being trustworthy. It's a big difference between the two of those. There are many who claim to be faithful, but when things get difficult or they get hard, they walk away. So when you're tested by that trial, are you going to stay with it or are you not? It's sort of like when people say, when all is said and done, more is said than done. All right? Or don't do what I do what I say. That kind of idea. So it means even when others are not faithful, despite them, you will still be faithful. It means you're going to keep your promises, even to those who break their promises. You're going to be honest with what you can do and can't do. Don't cash checks or make promises you can't keep. Okay, don't write checks you can't cash, rather. Someone who is reliable and trustworthy, and somebody is worthy of putting your confidence in. The reason that a faithful person is merciful is because they value even the smallest things you share with them. They will not disclose those to others. You can trust them. You can trust them with even the smallest concerns and worries you have, so you know you can trust them with the big ones as well. That's what Matthew chapter 5, 25, 21 means. When Jesus said, his master said to him, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a little, I will set you over much." That's exactly what he's saying. So if you pay attention, are faithful to Christ in the little things in your life, every little thing, every thought comes into the testing of the Spirit in your conscience, then he says, I'll trust you with bigger things. So then the last thing that we have here is forgiving. And that is the word, and this is really important to listen to on this. The word means to pardon or to be ready to forgive, as God said, I'm ready to forgive. It's only used one other place in the Bible, which is Psalm 86, verse 5. For you, O Lord, are good and forgiving, abounding in steadfast love. That's mercy to all who call upon you. So to forgive means to untie or loosen, such as to free somebody up or release them from any obligation to you. It means to absolve them and pardon them, to not hold them accountable, to remit someone's fault and exempt them from punishment. You don't take your pound of flesh out of them, okay, because you deserve it. It means to not hold personal offenses against them. That means that you can love them, not because they're lovable, but because you're loving them because you allow God to love them through you, and He loved you. Can't you love someone else? So the idea here is this. Forgive comes from the idea of F-O-R-E, which means to be forward or in front of or before something. And the give part means to grant or to give over, hand over, or release somebody. So to forgive somebody means to grant or hand over before or in front of something else. So it means to release somebody of their debt before they pay it off. It means to exonerate someone before they are even accused. And it means to pardon someone from punishment before they serve their sentence. You do this beforehand. You take, remember, the initiative. You don't wait for them to prove that they deserve your mercy. You don't wait for them to recant and to bleed and all of that until you forgive them. You do that all ahead of time. So that the idea is that you have readied yourself for forgiving someone so that the moment that you come across them, you can forgive them in an instant because you've already forgiven them. So it isn't a matter of them coming to you or whatever. You literally can go to them or run into them anytime, and it's not a big issue. That's why God says here in Matthew chapter 6:12, Jesus says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It's a mutual kind of thing. Forgiving in others in your heart allows God to truly release you and forgive you, not for your salvation. This is important here. But He forgives you from the curse of the anguish and the physical problems and the unfruitfulness that accompany bitterness, anger, and grudge holding from a lack of forgiveness. That's what God is able to do for you. He can release you from those things as you release others from yours. That's what He's talking about. And in 1 Peter 1:8 and Philippians 4:7 talks about that. And also then in John 8:36, he talks about how forgiveness relates to knowing the truth. So one last thought, and then we'll be finished up today. And that is this. These 5 aspects or facets or characteristics of mercy that we're talking about here are transformational. They're actionable and transformational. In other words, they're life-changing. If you can begin to do these, they will be life-changing to you. The grace of God will be able to flow through you to help others. The patience of God will flow through you to endure what others do to you. The love of God will flow through you to be generous to others. The faithfulness of God will flow through you to be true to others. And the forgiveness of God will flow through you to be at peace with others. That is how this works. It's God's character flowing through you to others, not you somehow mustering up enough character to do it. You can't do it. Without Him, you can do nothing. But with Him, nothing is impossible. You can love the most unlovely person, forgive the most difficult person. So the idea here is that merciful means that you will be set free. You'll be set free from all those things that could damage you because of not being merciful. I want to help illustrate this by having you think about the night sky. If we look at it with the naked eye, we simply see a broad scope, relatively close night sky. We don't see a lot of things. But if we use successively larger telescopes, we can see more and we can see more of what is already there. The more we enlarge our mercy to others, the more you will see God's mercy being shown to you. If you are not merciful to others, you are restricting God's ability to show mercy to you. And so Ephesians 2, 4 and 3 verse 8 all talk about that. That it says, we all, with an unveiled face, contemplate the Lord's glory. We look at Him, we see Him, we gaze on Him. We are being transformed, that is that life-changing part, into His image with ever-increasing glory. You get a deeper and deeper view of God's mercy, which comes from the Lord through His Spirit. When you consider all what is being said, every time you enlarge your grace, your patience, your love, your faithfulness, and your forgiveness to others, God becomes bigger and more beautiful and more precious than you ever imagined. Wait, before you go, YouTube won't give me a donation button until I reach 1,000 subscribers. Please subscribe and share this video. It will really help the channel. Thank you so much.